Hi, welcome back. In our last installment, we have completed our form, and we have add by adding the completed our form by adding form validation. Okay, the form will validate, check against whether our fields are correct, and also we are able to validate here as well. So in this episode, what we're going to do is that we're going to add some eye candy to our form. So if you notice, if I click on add, you notice that every one of this card, uh, this this is come up abruptly, and also if I delete them, it's sort of very jerky. So what I'm going to do is this: we are going to use angular animation to animate to create some transition, like perhaps you'll do a fade in, fade out. So it will fade in when we add a card, and it will fade out when we delete a card. So let's start. So before we get into Angular animation, what I want to do is this. I just want to explain a little bit the Angular animation concept first. Of course, the Angular animation is quite complex. There are a lot of things you can do. But in here, we'll just look at some of the basic ways of setting up an animation. Angular animation uses CSS. Uh, it automates this by creating a DSL, a domain specific like language into the Angular framework. So let me just very quickly explain a few concepts, and then I'll show you an example. You can find more about Angular animation on the Angular website. So just type Angular animation. You can get more information, and also there are a lot of other blogs on it as well. Okay. So the way CSS animation and Angular animation works is the first thing you do is that you define two states. Okay, so the source state where an element is. So we are going to animate an element, for example, like maybe like this guy here. Okay, so you define a source state, and you define what are the attributes, what are the initial uh, CSS attribute, and then you define the final state. You want to transition the element to, for example, like the height original is 0 px, maybe px, right? And you want to finally you want to you want it to be 100 px by 100 px. So you define two states, you give them the name, and you define their style. So that's the style. And then what you do is this: you 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 specify using the uh, trans, transition function. You specify the direction of the animation. So this is state 0. This is state 1. You specify that I'm going from state 0 to state 1 over a duration of a certain number of duration. So in this case, the duration is 300 millisecond, right? And to kick off this transition, you have to define a trigger to trick it off, to uh, to to kick off the process. Okay, so all these things, so you can define multiple triggers. Okay, so inside every trigger, you would have some state, one or more states, and a set of transitions going from changing from one state to another state. Okay, so let's go ahead and show you a simple example first, and then we will do the fade in, fade out. So like as usual, before we begin, I will create a new branch. So the last branch is part 5. So I'm going to create a new branch. Do check out minus b part 06, just to be sure. Okay, so I will now go into this. So before we start Angular animation is a separate package, is a separate module. So we need to add that module in. So the place to add it is in the add module. So to add that module, you go animation. So browser animation module. Okay, so that's the module, and then you add it in here. Okay, so we add the browser animation module. Okay, so now what we will do is this: we will what we'll do is this. I will show you a simple animation, not what we want to do, and then after that we'll implement I'll show you a simple animation first by animating a square to a circle, And then after that, we will use the concepts to implement the fade in, fade out. So I'll just do a simple box here. Okay, and then I'll just put a button so that we can trigger. I won't bother putting it. I won't bother styling it with CSS. So okay, so I've got that started. So let me just okay. So I've got this shape here. Okay, so let me go to my CSS and I will add. I'll create the box CSS. Okay, CSS. So I'll create a box, and then I want the width of the box be maybe 200 px, and the height be 200 px. I'll just put some space around the box, so maybe 50 px. Okay, so the box is here. So we will now go to our file. Okay, our component here, and we will now add in our animation. Okay, so let me import a few things first. Okay, so from at Angular animation, and then from here we will import in trigger, transition, state, style, and animate. Okay, so we'll go animate, transition, trigger, state, and style. There are a lot more of these functions. There are things like sequences, groupings, staggering. Okay, so that's our those are the functions that we're going to use. What you also need to do is this: in the component here, we will add in another attribute here, another field here called animation. So this is where we define all the animations related to this particular component. Okay, so we will start by just doing a animation for transitioning from a square from a square to a circle. Okay, so we'll define first of all. We'll start by defining a trigger. Okay, so let's call this from circle to square. Okay, and then we'll define a list of these things. This. Okay, so this is the name of the trigger which we'll use afterwards to pick up our animation. So I'll define the state here. I'll define a circle state. Okay, so we go state. So the name of this state is circle. Okay, and then the style is a box like this. Okay, so let me just put the style down here. Okay. So the style, what do we want? Okay, so we want the border. Okay, so the border to be 2px solid red. Okay, so we'll also put the background. We put the background color to be pink. Let's see. Okay, and then we want the border radius. Currently, since it's a square, so the border radius is 0. Okay, like that. So we can add the circle state into here. Like that. Okay. So what we can do is this, right? We can we add a variable here called shape, and then we will set it to circle. Okay. So this circle is the name of the state. So name of this state. So maybe let me just change it to full instead of circle. So do that, then that. Okay. Right. So we will call it circle, like that. Okay. So now what we can do is this. We can go back to our HTML. Okay, and we will bind that state to this shape by doing this: add circle to square, Okay, circle to square, and then we will. So we use attribute binding, the square bracket, and then we will say the shape. Okay, so the shape is this variable, which is currently holding this, which is currently saying that the state should be the state should be a circle. So we are saying inside this trigger, right? Look for this state called shape. So if you now go back to our board, you'll notice that that is a square. Oh, okay. So it's not a circle. So let me make this into a circle. So the border radius. So if you recall, the shape, the size, the width is 200. So 100 x. Okay, so now it's a circle. Okay. So we can also similarly define a square. Okay, by doing that. Okay, square. So we will probably say this blue, and then we will say light blue. Okay, and we will say the border radius to be 0. So now we will add the square in here, like that. Okay, so now we can go like this. So if we set this one to shape to square, now we get a square. Okay, so by just toggling, by just changing the the variable that holds the name of the state, we we change we change the state of the element. So to get it to toggle, all we need to do is this. Okay, we just create something here called toggle shape. Okay, like this, and then we just say this shape is equals to, if it's square shape, okay, then it's round, it's circle. Okay. Otherwise, it's square. Okay, okay. Then we'll just go to the button, and what we'll do is this: we'll just do a event binding. Just bind this to the toggle button. Okay, like that. So now, if we just click on this, right? Oops, there's an error. Toggle button. Okay, it's toggle shape. So if you go toggle shape, it means that you are changing the shape. Okay, so this changing of shape is like our cut, right? It's very abrupt. Okay, so we want to animate this, and the way we animate this is inside the trigger. Okay, we will use our transition function, which we have defined. So we now specify the direction of the. So the first one is the direction of the animation of the state. So we are going to go from let's say circle to square. Okay, and we want to animate this over, let's say, 300 milliseconds. Okay. Right. Similarly, we can flip the direction around by saying square and circle. Okay, also same 300 milliseconds. Okay, so now we can go like this. So notice that it's now smoother. So we are now animating our shape. Okay, so that's how animation works. So it's quite simple. You don't have to mess around with CSS. Okay, so now we are going to try and implement the fade in fade out for this guy. Okay, okay. So let me talk a little bit more about angular animation. So in the example that I've shown, right, we saw that we start the animation by defining a circle or a square, and then we transition to the other state, which is, let's say if this is square, then we transition to a circle, or from a circle to a square, right? How, but when we are animating this card, what we are essentially doing is this: we are essentially bringing an element that doesn't exist into existence. So basically what we want to do is this, we want to gently fade in an element that is being created, right? So if you recall, right, every time when we add a card, when you click on add card, right, the Angular application, our application, the insert card, the add card application, the let's see, where is it? The add card will create a new card here, right? Every time we remove card, you will remove one card. So what we want to do is this. We want to we want to say that every time when a new DOM element, a new card is added into the page, right? We want it to slowly transition from being like transparent over to the default style, whatever the default style is. So this is the default style, okay? So Angular animation has got two special state. So remember previously in here we defined some state, right? So we define some states here, which is uh, which is square and circle, right? So Angular animation has got two special state. One is void. Void the void state basically means that the element doesn't exist. Okay. So and then there is another special state which is the wildcard state, the asterisk state. It basically means match any state. Okay, match any state. So to perform a transition in from to for Angular animation to capture something that's a DOM element that's being created, basically what we do is that we will say the transition goes from void to any state. Okay, go from any state, and then you apply this animation. Okay, so the state has already been defined. All we need to do is just define the style. Okay, right? So the state is been defined. So all we need to do is just define the style. So what we're going to do is this: we're going to define a style. So we'll say cons, right? We'll say cons. Let's call this state, for lack of a better name, we'll call it style 0. We'll call it void style. Okay, so we'll say style. Okay, so we'll just define this part. We don't have to define the state because the state is already defined, which is the void state. Okay, so we'll say like this: the opacity is 0. Okay, so we define one style. So what we do is here is this. Okay, so we'll define in our trigger here. We'll define another trigger. So we'll call this fade in out. Okay, and then we will say this. So this list of the my animation. So all I have to just do is say this transition, right, from void to any state. Okay. Okay. We'll start off with the void state, and then we'll animate for 300 milliseconds. Okay, to its final state, whatever the final state is. So like that. Okay, right? Okay. So let me comment this guys out. Okay. And also let me comment this guys out. Yeah. So I'll leave it in here as a reference, so you can have a look at it. Okay. Right. Okay. So let's have a look at this again. So we'll say I'm transiting. So this is the trigger. The trigger is called fading out. I'm transiting from void to any state. Okay. So the way the transition works is you start with the void state. So the void state I've defined here. The void style. The void style is opacity is 0, and then I animate 300 millisecond, right? So now what I will do is this: I will apply. So let me also comment this guy up. Okay. So now I will apply this to here. Okay. So I will say, so since I don't need to bind it to any variable, so I can just do like this: fade in out. Okay. So I'm attaching the trigger to this element. Okay. So now let's see what happens. So if I click this now, notice that the element now slowly fades in, right? So you can still do so. removing the element is still very jerky, okay, very abrupt. So we can try using the bidirectional. Okay, so let's try this. Okay, so that's good. So okay, so notice it's not very good. Okay, so for whatever reason, it doesn't work that well. This thing bidirectional. So all we do is this: just define another one of these guys. Okay, so now we go from this to void. Void. Okay, so we will say you start with the animation and we'll animate it to void star. Okay, so let's try this. So we can add some. Uh, let's add some transformation to this. So let's say we do this one like this. So we use the CSS transform. Okay, then we'll say translate y is 100% like that. Okay, so we can go. So it moves. Okay, so when we delete, okay, we can there's a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more style to it. Okay, so this is the end of this episode. So as you can see, adding animation to to Angular is actually quite simple. In the next episode, what we're going to do is this: we have finished with we have like finished about 70% of our component. So the next in the next episode of this series, what we'll do is that we'll start defining different routes. So you start making this application into a single page application, a spa, by defining a few different routes. So a few routes will be like, you know, uh, how we view, we can view the list of bots that we created, the bots that we created. We can edit it, we can create new one, we can delete the bot. So each of those function is a route. Okay, so rather than just looking at one, we can have different menu items, and the menu items will lead us to different parts of the application. So in the next part, we'll create more components, and then we'll convert this into a single page app. Okay, till then, stay safe.